Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking about the Tenant Estoppel certificate. This form is used when you purchase properties with tenants and you're going to keep the tenants as your own. A wise thing to do when purchasing income properties with tenants is to ask for the rent rolls and the lease agreements. Um, However, although they provide you with that information and those documents, one can never be 100% certain that that's the actual case. So, what do we do to protect ourselves and ensure that what they're giving us in paper is what's actually going on? Again, we don't know if these documents are true, they're not certified, but the tenant estoppel certificate is a document that is signed by the actual tenant, and we're going to go over it now. This is a tenant estoppel certificate um, by the CAR form, the California Association of Realtors. There's different forms that you can use, and or you can hire an attorney to create one for you. It asks for the tenant's names, the premises, the lease agreement if it's attached, the date of the lease, the name of the landlord, the name of the tenant, the base rent paid through X amount of months or years, the security deposit that was given, other deposits, expiration date of the current term, number and location of parking spaces, number and location of storage spaces, who pays the utility services. And all this information is very important to know because we don't want to have any issues or contractual issues with a tenant down the line. When you're acquiring an income property, for example, an apartment complex, or it could be a home with a tenant in it, you want to make sure that what you think you're purchasing is what you're in fact purchasing. And you want to go into the landlord business knowing what you're getting yourself into and what your expenses are going to be. So that includes knowing who pays the utilities. Okay. And also if the appliances are included and if they're functioning. Okay, so number two, the tenant represents that the original lease remains in full force and effect and continues the lease agreement between the tenant and landlord except for the following modifications. There are no verbal or written agreements or understandings between landlord and tenant with respect to the premises except as set forth above. The tenant is the actual occupant and is in possession of the leased premises. So this is very important because in a situation where you would have to evict the tenants, when you go through an eviction, you have to ensure that you have all of the names of the people who are living in the home. Otherwise, you cannot legally evict someone if they're not listed on the eviction. And therefore, if they're not listed on the contract and they're not listed on the lease agreement, then it's going to be very challenging to obtain their names to evict them. All right, so this is just one last opportunity for the tenant to disclose that nobody else lives there. Okay, all obligations of the landlord under the lease have been fully performed and the landlord is not in default under any term of the lease. Tenant has no defenses, offsets, counterclaims to the payment of rent or other terms due from the landlord, from the tenant to the landlord. Again, you don't want to inherit a tenant who has liens on the lease, meaning perhaps the landlord promised that they would fix something and they never did, and now you're not aware of those issues, and when you acquire the property, you're hit with an unexpected expense. And then number 6, ask the tenant that they have not filed for bankruptcy. 7, tenant represents that they're not in default of any obligations under the lease and has not committed any breach of the lease and has not received a notice for default under the lease, which has not been cured. To correct addresses for notices and to tenants in the premises above are otherwise shown below. Well, they should be living in the house or the complex. And the person signing below represents that he or she is duly authorized by tenant to execute this statement on the tenant's behalf. The tenant understands that a lender may make a loan secured in whole or part by the premises, and if the lender does so, the lender's action will be in material reliance on the estoppel certificate. So if your client or if you are financing an income property, your lender's going to want to see an estoppel certificate. Sometimes the lenders are pretty lenient and they'll just take the lease agreement. However, when it goes through underwriting, if it's any tad bit questionable or they just want to make sure, they'll issue out an estoppel certificate. They might have their own forms or they'll require your realtor to submit this. And that's pretty much it. So the form is signed by the tenant, by the landlord or manager, and then it's receipted and acknowledged, and that's it. So if you have any questions about acquiring a property with tenants, please feel free to email me with all of your questions. I'm here to help. I'm sorry I'm super tired today. It's been quite the day, and thank you again for tuning in.